Hello, Journey family and friends. Welcome to Midweek Conversations. Pastor John Hampton here. Pastor Dustin Agard is in the house.
Yes, sir. Good to be back.
Back with us.
Great midweek last week with Pastor Russell. That was great.
Hey, that was fun.
That was
good.
good.
Yeah, great job, Pastor Russell. Just all things Lake County. And God is doing so many great things at Lake County. We don't hear enough about that at Apopka. So that was cool. And not just Russell, his whole team. And they just had the great appreciation for Next Gen volunteers this past Friday. Samantha Upham, who leads our Next Gen kids team out there. Great job.
Had a cool baptism this past week.
Had a baptism in Lake County.
Isn't that cool?
We'll get into all that, just what we're seeing. But so Pastor Dustin, I went to a church, big church, Southland Christian Church, Lexington, Kentucky, years ago, and the pastor comes out. He wasn't the one that preached that night; somebody else preached. But he comes out and he has duct tape on his mouth, and he rips off the duct tape and he said, I've been waiting to tell you this for a long time. And he announced a new campus. And it turns out it's their biggest campus, but they literally bought a mall. They bought an old Lexington mall in Lexington. And it is now their biggest campus, bigger than the broadcast campus. But I thought this week, if I had duct tape, I'll put it on my mouth and I feel like I tear it off. We can finally talk about what me and you have been talking about for a long time with our transition and succession talks.
Yeah, and people are still processing it.
Sure,
but it's not something that
so
we
am
are.
I.
But we've been processing it for years.
Yeah, exactly.
And from the beginning, what you've said I thought was so great is you wanted it to be a long on ramp and a long off ramp, so that it's the worst kept secret we've ever had.
Yeah.
Meaning when we announce it, people are like, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And we saw a lot of that. And there are some people that think they have the gift of discernment. And the truth is, you just did a great job of setting it up little bit by little bit to really ease the transition as much as possible.
Well, what we're going to do this week and next week in Midweek Conversations, just talk a little bit about why and some more behind the scenes stuff. That's not necessarily what you're hearing. It's not a repeat of content from Sunday is I guess what I should say. So just want to set that up. However, we don't want to bury the lead in case anybody missed it and you're watching this. I announced this past Sunday that at the end of December, I'll be stepping aside as lead pastor, and Pastor Dustin is our next lead pastor starting in January 2023. And that is something he and I have been praying about and planning for, along with our elder team. And really, I could say elder teams because as Randy Scoggins, our elder chair, who's going to join us next week here. Randy, in case you're watching, you're going to join us next week here. But Randy, he said it so well in his article on our succession website, our webpage. 13 different elders have been a part of this process. Right, we currently have 5. So that just tells you we've been working on this for a while. Some of those elders, their terms have ended, they've rotated off. There's at least 3 different elder chairs that have been a part of my conversations throughout this whole process. Barry Hazlitt, David Bass, and now Randy Scoggins. And I may even give Tim HUDSPETH a little, we'll give you an asterisk on this, assist on this. Tim and I talked when Tim was chair several years ago, just a little bit about you in particular and about what God could be preparing you for.
We even had, this was really cool, we even had one of our elders that moved away.
Yes.
Joe Davenport.
Joe Davenport, God bless you, Joe Davenport.
How cool was that? So he moved away.
Yeah, Joe and Debbie Davenport lived in, and they were a part of the transition from Lakeview to Journey back in 2002. Joe was chairman of the elders at the time when they moved from Lakeview to Journey. So he was a part of that. And Joe had just come back on the elder team a couple years ago, and then they decided to move to the beach. And had some family over there. Debbie retired. Great time to sell their house. And so this Sunday, before the service starts at 9:30, I look up and here's Joe and Debbie Davenport. And that just meant the world to both of us.
It did.
Just
it was an hour and a half
them.
drive each way just to come and support.
Joe knew what was coming.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, I just wanted to be here for that day.
Isn't that cool?
And that is so cool.
Shows the heart of our elders.
Absolutely.
And really special.
So there's a web page. You can see it right here. You go to it, and it's called journeychristian.com/transition. And there's a brief video from me. You'll read something from Dustin, myself, Randy Scoggins, timeline, and then some frequently asked questions that we put on there as well. And as we continue on in this journey, relevant videos like this one will be on that page as well. This Sunday's message on the 22nd will be on this page as well. But let's back way up and talk about some things before all this. So, Dustin, it has been my observation for a long time about a lot of leadership. And I shared this with my best buddy, David Vaughn, who's finishing up his time as lead pastor in Cincinnati next month. So Dave knows I've shared this with him. I said this years ago. Most leaders do not finish the way they want.
Yeah.
And that's not just true in pastorate. I've seen that in sports. I mean, think of the coaches. How many coaches have left when they wanted to?
Say that line that you shared this weekend. They either get kicked out. What was the three options?
Well, the retiring pastor said, "You can carry me out, you can kick me out, or I can walk out." And I choose to walk out.
I thought that was a great.
I choose to walk out.
It's
but,
great.
I mean, when you think about transitions in leadership, corporate leadership, how often does a CEO leave on his terms at his timing, and hand it off in a really healthy way? So that has been something. I think that's important for people to know. That's been in my heart for years. I mean, way before I ever started talking about transition for me. I just observed that. Leaders, most leaders, and some really good leaders, they didn't end well. And I just prayed, Lord, if I could end well, that I really want to do that. I really want to hand this, wherever I'm at, whatever ministry I'm leading at the time, turns out it's journey, I really want to end well. But I think that's an important foundational piece to kind of my thinking and our planning on all this is how do we do that? So I guess a part of what...
And for me, if I can share.
Sure.
For me, I see, sadly, there's just so many pastors that either fall morally or they burn out or they just lost that love and feeling or deconstructing their faith.
Yeah.
And to see a pastor go 42 years in ministry, you're not leaving because you don't love it, and you're not leaving because you're not good at it. You're just taking the high road and feeling like God's in it, which we believe. And I'm grateful for so many people and my friends that have looked to you and people like you that go, okay, there's a bullseye it is possible to finish strong. I've seen it. I've watched them up close, not just on a platform. And for you to know that is, it shouldn't be as rare, but sadly it is. And so I'm grateful for your 4 decades of ministry, healthy ministry.
Thank you. I just have to give a shout out to Bob Russell. Bob is a hero for me. I mentioned him in the messages past week. Bob really influenced a generation of pastors. And I'm in that generation. We just were in awe of what God did at Southeast all those years. And I never will forget when I learned of his transition. I mean, go back, I think it was 2006. Bob was 62. Bob's always been a very handsome, young-looking guy. I mean, he was at the pinnacle. Thousands of people watching, listening to his messages across the country. At the time, Southeast was doing their messages on a big radio station, a lot of wattage that goes all over the place, and his messages were carried on radio. This is in the day before a lot of internet, which kind of replaced a lot of that.
No Spotify podcast to download.
Right, yeah, but people were listening, and Bob, when he stepped aside, he was 62, I believe, when he stepped out. And I was one of those at the time, like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? I mean, they just built this huge building, about 4 or 5 years ahead of that, and we're filling it. And I was just amazed. But as Bob has a great book, we'll put it on the screen here, called Transition Plan. Highly influential on me in this whole process. I drew a lot from the message this past week. A lot of those 5 points, I got those from Bob, or they were original with him, and I modified it for our situation from him. But it was really just a master class, Dustin, in seeing how a transition can go, and that inspired me. That inspired me, and my buddy David Vaughn, and so many of us have said, hey, we want to do that. But that means if you're going to do that well, you're going to need to step aside really before you have to, and before you need to. That's the only way a healthy transition works like that.
You learn from Bob Russell. I got to learn from someone almost on that level, I would say, Brother Jim Henry. So Jim Henry was
right here in Orlando.
So he was my pastor at First Baptist Orlando. And I remember him passing the baton to Pastor David Youth, who's still there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember,
and Pastor Jim Henry, he was a larger-than-life figure here in Central Florida.
I remember thinking, I never want to do that because I think people love Brother Jim more than Jesus. Like, I remember thinking, man, people love Brother Jim. And that's not a knock on him. He's just that great of a pastor.
Exactly right.
I remember from a young age thinking, that's just dumb. I never want to follow a healthy, successful pastor.
Yeah.
And then here I am. So be careful what you say you don't want to do, because I remember thinking I never want to be David Youth, and how hard that would be to come after somebody that's just done such a great job.
Well,
and so those are two models that we've seen done healthy.
Yeah.
And here we remember them decades later.
Absolutely.
That's the mark of health, and I love that.
Yeah, I totally agree that both of us were profoundly marked by that, and saw that. And isn't it cool that God lets us be in a position to be that guy and that guy, to be in that. That's been very cool about that. I'm just blown away by the goodness of God in all this. We shared why transition, and so part of this, what we're doing here today, just a little more backstory on why transition. But that was the message this past Sunday, just kind of unpacking why it's important. And I talked about 5 different reasons why it's important that we talk about transition. This Sunday, we're going to shift.
And let me just say, all the feedback I got, I heard the exact same thing. They said, I've never seen a church be so transparent or honest or humble in a transition as this. They've not seen it. And that's, I think the church, we can do better. That's a sad for the capital C church. The community deserves better. But I can't tell you how many times I heard so many people say that about your humility, your servanthood, and I'm just grateful, and I know I speak on behalf of so many people, for you to lead with vulnerability, for you to lead with humility, and that does not go unnoticed. Sometimes when you are vulnerable, you wonder, all right, who's got my back? Is this going to work?
Yeah.
But God, when it's done with righteousness, God always takes care of his people. And so just grateful for how you've led that conversation, not just Sunday, but for the past 2 or 3 years as we're unpacking. We've been going through this for several years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something you learn as you look at the timeline on the webpage. And that's what we're going to talk about this week is a little bit more. I want you to hear from me why I believe Pastor Dustin is our next lead pastor, because I definitely believe that and have strong convictions about that. So we're going to start with that, and then you're going to join me.
Yeah. And
we're going to do kind of a Sunday conversation.
Yeah, it's going to look like this.
It's going to look like this, but you and I are going to kind of merge our timeline talk about, what God was doing in me, what God was doing in you, and TJ, because TJ is a very important part of this whole conversation.
Very important.
As well, and mine and Melinda's story as well. So that's what this week is going to be about. And I think one of the things, Dustin, that I hear consistently, and again, it's just the favor and the goodness of God, the mercy of God on us and on Journey, is I'll get emotional, is our relationship. And I don't know that people understand that as much, is how much I love you and want you to win and so excited about what God's going to do through you. Maybe it's good we're doing this on Wednesday, not on Sunday as well. But I do think that's important for people to get that dynamic. And people have noticed that over the years. They've seen that with me and you. And people who watch Midweek, we have a faithful group of people besides your mother and my mother. Melinda and TJ, not even my mom. I should say Melinda and TJ that are watching this, but they've seen that. But boy, that is such a blessing and a huge part of this whole transition talk.
Yeah, if you didn't hear, after the passing of the baton, Pastor John's going to step out for 12 months.
Yeah.
And something the elders thought would be best for everybody involved. And I won't forget when you called me, and it was right when you were wrestling with that.
Yeah.
You weren't sure what to make of it. And if I could share this, you just said, well, 12 months, I'm just going to miss you. And walking through this together, and it wasn't about you, it wasn't about power, it was just about our friendship.
Yeah.
And then when we told the staff, several weeks ago, we had a staff retreat and played softball. Before all that, we shared this with the staff.
You had to bring the softball game up again, didn't you?
we had to. So we shared this with the staff, and Pastor John shared. And then he came off the platform, and I gave him a hug, and I just like middle school girl lost it. Like I just uncontrollably just wept, and it's just because I know what he's going through, and I'm grateful. I'll share this on Sunday, nobody has sacrificed more for me professionally and selflessly served me. And so just grateful for him. And I'm in these cohorts with pastors around the nation and even Canada that are in transitions, and we're learning from each other.
Yeah.
And they're asking me questions. Talk to me, why is it, a little bit healthier on your end? And I don't know what to tell you guys. Like, follow somebody you genuinely love. I don't know how you do that. Like, God just wove our friendship together. Right. You can't just copy and paste that in different
But that's part of the story for Journey. That is very, I think that is different. That's part of the story for Journey. Back to Bob and Russell and his successor, Dave Stone. I mean, they worked together for several years, longer than you and I have, exactly. But there was a special bond that they had that made that work, and I sensed that early on between me and you. There was just a bond that you and I had just as pastors before we talked about, hey, you'd be the next lead pastor. We just enjoyed working together, and so that's been great. You mentioned we'll wrap it up here in a little bit, but you brought a couple of books. So you have been in preparing yourself. Not only have I been preparing for this, you've been preparing. Going to what is called an ascending pastor cohort.
Yes.
People that are stepping up from one level to the lead pastor chair. And these are people from all over the country and even Canada.
So the reason we've been preparing for this for 2 or 3 years is the same reason I'm in a cohort is the experts say that a poor transition can waste away 1 year's annual budget from a church and set the church back 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And so for you and the elders did a great job of saying, we don't want to waste 3 to 5 years. We don't want to waste all that money. How can we make sure we're doing everything that we can, may not be perfect, everything in our power to set this up right? So one of the things that you did is you started going to a cohort of pastors that were transitioning. And then you said, hey, there's this ascent thing that I think you would like. And so I joined one on the incoming pastors coming in. So there's 7 pastors from all around the nation and one in Canada, which I believe is the largest church in Canada. And these are all pastors of large churches that are in a 2-year window of transitioning.
Yeah.
So either they just did transition or they're about to. And we got together 3 times in the past 12, 15 months. And And then we were coached from churches that were successful, and they're passing the baton. And so we learned from them. And this past week, just last week, I was in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And that group of guys has just been so meaningful. And you can see this photo of us. We are on this, what's called the Manitou Incline.
Man.
And it needs a different word because it's really a mountain. I don't know what incline is. That kind of dumbs it down.
Right.
It is this, you start, I think it's at 6,500 feet in Colorado Springs, go to about 9,000 feet. And at first they're kind of steps, but then the incline is so steep that you almost have to almost go up it with your hands.
Yeah.
That wore me out.
So that exercise, the mountain climber, that's legit.
That was what I should have done to prepare for that. So this group of guys, we were in Colorado Springs, and it was just always so special.
Yeah.
And the church we were part of, Pastor Brady Boyd out there with New Life, and I got to meet one of their pastors, a guy named Daniel Grothy, and he wrote this book not long ago, just came out, The Power of Place. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I just want to share this with them. This is a notebook of all of our times together, just full of pages of us preparing, of us learning and trying to figure
kind of your
out.
succession notebook.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, right.
And then this book just came out, and I read it literally in 36 hours, and I thought, God in His timing, I read it last week, perfect timing with where we're going. It's called The Power of Place. And it talks about how saints and monks, they would make several vows. We know the vow of charity, which is about our finances. Yep. They would make a vow of chastity with their sexuality. But what most people didn't know, I didn't know, is the number one vow that they would make is the vow of stability. They would make a vow to stay in one community the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And so this book is about the power of place. And of course, one guy said he told a church that he's never going to leave. And I like how he said that, because what he did is he was trying to cash a check that he didn't write. Because we don't know our future.
Right,
God's in charge of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the heart is, are we prepared to at least say, hey, in this season, I don't see, and that's where I am with Journey. And we'll go into that in detail on Sunday. But God didn't call me just to a lead pastor role. God called me to Journey, and TJ and I.
Yeah.
And this is where we see ourselves. We love Central Florida. We're excited to be able to be here for what we see as a foreseeable future.
Pastor Dustin, I love that. And that's one of the things I talk about early on, why I think Dustin's our next guy. Dustin is a native. He's a proud son of Central Florida. So that just reinforces that. But we don't want to bury the lead again. So this past week, we announced I'm stepping aside, you're stepping up, at the end of the year and beginning of the year. We had 4 baptisms.
Come on.
We had 3 baptisms at a Popcat. We had 1 baptism at Lake County.
Isn't that cool?
4 people were baptized in the transition talk.
If you can get saved and baptized in a transition talk, this is what that means.
You know God's at work.
The Holy Spirit's moving. Because you and I talk about this a lot, or every now and then. I talk about how I want God to move when I'm not expecting it. Like, that was a unexpected, spirit-filled moment. Totally. None of us could have planned.
Unscripted.
Or would have planned.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know. I've shared with our staff, I knew what I was going to say. I didn't know what people were going to hear. Yeah. And
that's good.
I didn't know how God was going to lead.
And not just for this weekend, we had one at Rooted, the Rooted celebration.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
On Thursday, so we had 1 baptism at Rooted.
Well, it was just like a Rooted group.
Yeah, not the celebration.
It was just a normal Rooted
gathering.
group, a women's group led by Sandra Green, Pastor Randy's wife. And that baptism came out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we just see God doing a lot of good stuff, and we're just grateful to be a part of it, grateful to do it together, and excited about the future. But I would say this, and this is kind of a way I've said it. This is, for me as lead pastor, this is the beginning of the end, and it's the start of a long goodbye. I'm not going anywhere right now. I'm going to be here through the end of the year. I'll take that 12-month break. But one of the things that won't happen is that it's not like I'm not going to speak to Dustin for 12 months. That's not an option here. Yeah. You and I are going to stay in contact, relationship. It's about me doing anything in an official capacity for Journey in any way. But as I told Dustin, leading Journey may not be my number one pursuit in the future, but helping you is. And will be. So that relationship will continue. So I want to make people, want to clarify that as well. And we're going to talk a lot more about all this Sunday.
And then he's going to charge me for it.
Well,
we'll
get to that later.
Fee.
That's in the small
print.
print.
Right now I'm getting it for free. I'm going to get a consulting fee in the future.
Oh, man. Well, yeah, that's in the fine print. We'll get to that. Hey, thanks for joining us this week on Midweek Conversations. We hope you join us this Sunday in person, online. Either way, 9:30, 11:15. It's part 2 of Transition Talks. And Pastor Dustin and I will share more this week about all this. So grateful for you. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, we're loving the journey.